Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation presents Our Story, hosted by the Foundation's chairman and president, Jason Villalba. Each week on Our Story, hear the personal and intimate stories of Hispanics all across Texas, told in their own voices. Our Story provides insight into a community of people who are literally and figuratively changing the complexion of the United States. This is who we are.
Welcome back to the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation's Our Story. Each week, we bring you the intimate and personal stories of Texas Latinos from all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds. These are our stories. Today, we have a very special friend of mine, Adryana Aldeen. She and I have been friends for over a decade. She became friends with me during the time that I was running for politics. She has a varied background, from consultant to newscast analyst to mom to stepmom, just a number of different stories. But I think you'll find that her story is compelling and inspirational as well. So, Adryana, welcome to Our Story.
Thank you very much, Jason. Gracias por tenerme en tu programa. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great that you're here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I know that you're facing some trials in your life, and so for you to be here with me today is special, and I'm glad we had this opportunity to have a conversation. Let's start from the beginning. I always like to do that. Where are you from, Adryana?
Well, I'm originally from Puebla, Mexico. For those of you who do not know Puebla, Puebla is where the original Cinco de Mayo battle occurred in Mexico, and is a beautiful place. It's the fourth largest city of the whole country of Mexico. And I was born there, born and raised there. So my parents. And I'm from the main city, from the capital city, where the Talavera is. And I have to say, the best Mexican food and the best food in the world.
Well, not only the best Mexican food, but the best water is from Puebla.
That's right.
One of my very, very close friends, Jimmy Garza, who's going to be on the show, has a water called Tehuacan. And and I've actually visited your hometown. I was in Tehuacan recently, or last year, and I had a chance to go and visit the city, and I saw the beautiful state of Puebla. In Mexico. And so I've seen where you're from, and it's a vibrant city and a great deal of fun. Were you raised by your folks, or were your grandparents a big part of your life, or how was your upbringing in Mexico, and when did you come to the States?
Well, both. Actually, on my dad's side, I only have grandfather, abuelo, because abuela had passed away before I was born. And I do remember seeing him various times. We visit him. But certainly my mom's parents were more present in my life. My abuelita Maria, my abuelo Alfredo. But I was raised by my parents. My parents have a pretty family. For a long time, it was only two girls, my older sister, which is a year and a half older than me, and me. My mom dressed us as twins. Many people thought for a while that we were twins or not, because we were dressed alike. And then 10 years later, after I was born, my brother joined us. So we have a happy family, and I was raised by them.
Tell me about life in Puebla growing up. What's a typical day in the life in that part of the country and for you?
It's a conservative city. It's a city that has a lot of tradition. The downtown area is beautiful. In our case, my parents raised, as I mentioned, for a long time, we were only two girls. So we were in a private Roman Catholic school where we were raised. And it was important for my parents that we have values on us. And the city has evolved so much since I was there, Jason. Really, right now, Puebla has the classical, the beautiful, old, very antique buildings like the Cathedral of Puebla, which is beautiful. Puebla is actually called Puebla de los Ángeles, which means of the angels, which the tradition said that the angels put the bell on top of the cathedral. But now it's also a modern city, and it has just everything that we have here in the United States. And many people will be impressed to see how modern the city of Puebla is. So that's what happened. And then I came to the United States after high school, and I joined in the late 80s. I came to Dallas, Texas.
Well, tell me about mom and dad and their influence on you. Were you closer to your mom or your dad? And if so, why?
This is a great question. And my father passed away 30 years ago, but I must say that I was closer to my dad. I guess that for a long time, since he has the two girls, I was a girl that hung more into my dad. My dad was my coach on public speaking. I started public speaking very young. Jason, I remember first grade that the nuns took me to an older class. I cannot tell you now that it was junior high or high school, but she took me to that classroom and I saw all the big kids. And all she said is open the book and read to them. And I read to them what she told me to read. And after she looked at all the classes and she said, that's the way that you need to read and express yourself. And I was only 7 years old. So that was the first audience that I remember when I hear clapping to me. By second grade, I already was competing in oratory and my father coaching me. How should I speak, move my hands and do all that? And by sixth grade, well, I was already in national championships in Los Pinos, which is the White House of Mexico. And just, I can tell you, that's the reason my father was closer to me. Just like a baseball player, when you ask them when they start playing baseball, they will say, well, the first time was when my dad gave me the glove and the ball or like that. I can tell you that was my dad. My dad was very important in how I start speaking public audiences. What did your dad do for a living? Well, my dad worked at the cotton business. Pueblo is very important to have that. So he was on the industrial engineering of cotton and making everything that have to do, because they develop either fabric with cotton, but they develop other things. But it was in the beginning of the process of cotton business. Was he a political man? Did he get engaged in Mexican politics? I know as he must have trained you in oratory, that he probably imparted some political advice to you. Is that something that you recall? Yes, I recall, for example, he put me in front of TV to watch things that have to do with the wall in Germany and explain to me what communism was. He explained to me the fact why the Cuban people could not leave Cuba. And that was interesting when my father sometimes came from a trip and say, come with me to knock at the door because I have a letter from a Cuban that I brought from there to give to a relative. And then they opened the door and my father said, I brought you a letter from your relative. And I saw the people crying. And he explained to me that lack of freedom. I also remember my father was in a political party, which is called the PAN, which is the Conservative Party. But he never ran for office, so he never was interested on that, but it was mainly opinion. He put me in front of TV to hear to Margaret Thatcher when she was speaking, and I was like in awe to listen when she became the Prime Minister of England, and all that impressed me so much. But it was not until later that an uncle of mine became a governor of the state of Tlaxcala, where also my mom got also involved by working with him. But that's what I saw mainly growing up. Tell me a special memory about you and your father that you believe was a moment that shaped your life. I mean, obviously, he's a big part of your life. He's coaching you to become a great speaker. He's educating you on politics. But there had to be a special personal moment that you can recall that was the time when he just showed you a different way of looking at things. Tell me about one of those. Well, that's interesting. So since I was so expressive beside public speaking, I like to sing. So I started singing also as a little girl. And back then we have the contact with Raul Velasco, which was the main guy in Mexico and the whole country with the big show on Sundays, having all the artists coming. And I wanted to sing. And for a long time, I wanted to sing. And I went to Televisa to try to see if I do an audition. And they asked me, yes, that the composer will take me on, a famous composer that I will not say his name because he has a bad reputation now. But the issue was that he took young women who were young, attractive, and sing well to do tours with him. And my parents say no. Oh, I cried so much, Jason. My parents saying no, that I will not do the singing. And I remember my father having a conversation with me and saying, you are great in public speaking. You need to choose between speaking or singing, because it's better that you go in one way. My parents didn't want me to pursue becoming an artist and a singer. And anyway, he convinced me to just go on the public speaking. And later on, as I mentioned to you, this composer who made very, very famous singers now, but with a lot of scandal around, I saw the wisdom of my parents as parents trying to protect me as a daughter of just traveling alone without the presence of my parents when I was a young girl. And I just thought that was very, very important, because even if I cried back then, many times sometimes you, Jason, as parents, maybe have to tell no to your kids, and it's hard. But once we have gone through experience, parents know what is the best for their kids.
Yeah, I think it's hard to watch our children be unhappy. I know growing up, I could see the pain in my parents' eyes when I was upset or my sister was upset. But as a parent, it just breaks your heart to see
Yes.
Your children in pain or sad. So I recognize that. Tell me a little bit about your mom. We've talked a lot about your dad. What was mom's influence on you?
Well, my mom was beautiful, and she's still beautiful physically and inside. But she always identified more with my older sister because my older sister always more to her. I was more rebellious about, I wanted to do my own thing, She paid attention in us doing our homework. She's a great cook and she's beautiful. And I also remember back in the day, we went to the movies and my mom was in commercials. So I remember seeing my mom coming out in the big screen, and I was just impressed because it was my mother. She never did anything beyond publicity on things that have to do with, because she's beautiful. But at the same time, we always argue more. I love my mom. She has been with me, especially these last 4 months. It's just incredible. But she was a great mom. And I know all parents try to do the best. And once years pass, we realize when maybe we didn't understand our kids as much. But that's one of the memories I have.
What a warm upbringing you had, both mom and dad, in a beautiful city like Pueblo, and the opportunity to have a sister and experience great things. And, that's something that so many people who end up in the United States have come from different backgrounds, right? I mean, they come from backgrounds where they might have seen poverty, or they might have had a situation where they had to come to the United States. But I think your path, your journey started differently than others. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I want to talk a little bit about your religious upbringing as well. So you're going to Catholic school and you probably grew up Catholic, but I think today you identify as evangelical. Tell me about that conversion, when that occurred. It may have been much later in life, but as you know, this is a big part of our community, is our faith traditions. And obviously many of us are Catholic. I'm Methodist, but those conversions that happen, how do they happen? Why do they happen? When did it happen to you?
Well, I have a high respect for people of all faiths, but I think in my case, yes, I did grow up as a Roman Catholic, and I went to private Roman Catholic schools up to high school. So that was my upbringing. And I'm not going to say that my parents were that religious, because we didn't went to mass necessarily every Sunday, but we were in the private Catholic school, of course. It was when I was a senior in high school, which actually my place was the valedictorian, and it was important for the school that the valedictorian will render to certain things. But I have never understood exactly what Jesus had done for me on the cross until I have an accident I used to do horseback riding. And the thing is this, after that accident, and a person started talking with me more about a personal relationship with Jesus, I finally heard exactly. I understood, although I have heard it many times, and I knew why was the reason that Jesus died for me and for my sins. And I applied to my life. I understood, and I repented and asked Jesus to be my Lord and Savior. So that was the moment of my conversion. And then it did cost me some strife and fights with my own family, because it was hard. I was the first person in the family who converted to Evangelical Christianity, and they look at me like I was betraying my faith after I was upbringing, and especially because I chose to come to the States and I went to an evangelical Bible college. But then the time passed, and I also matured, and I came to understand that religion is not what is important. What is important is to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and you can have it in or outside of a denomination. The important thing is to have that relationship.
Well, obviously, those conversions are very personal. For you, it sounded like it began with an accident that probably put you in the hospital. But it sounds also like you might have had an influence that shaped that opinion. Because that's a big jump, right? Going from a Roman Catholic upbringing and family who's very loving in a place like Puebla to becoming an evangelical Christian is a tremendous leap. Was it more driven by the stories and the proselytization of the people that came to you, or was it more personal in the sense that you knew in your life you were looking for something different than what you had from a faith perspective, and then it occurred, or both?
Well, let's put it this way. I guess like me, like many other people, as a young woman, I got involved in the ground youthful pursuits, and there was some guilt part, and it was a relief to know that Jesus had died for all, and that all I needed to ask was forgiveness and belief. But I was not necessarily looking; it just came just like that. And I was 17 years old, and that happened, and it was a joy in my heart to know that there is not intercessor between me and God, but only His Son, Jesus Christ. And that's all I needed to do, to talk with Him. And it just gave me a lot of rest on my heart.
I think it's fascinating because so many people don't understand evangelical Christianity. And of course, there are different types of evangelical Christianity.
Yes.
But I think you crystallized for those people who really identify with that it's the personal relationship that you have with God, and there is no intercessionary individual. And I think that's a big driver. I know so many people who were Catholics growing up, including my wife, who are now not Catholic. And it's those kinds of stories, I think, that begin with the story that you told, that it's just a personal experience, and that's how it changes. And so that's important. Okay, so I want to move forward a little bit to your journey to the States. Again, often I hear people who have come here to the country have left great poverty or were looking for opportunities. Clearly, you had a wonderful upbringing in life growing up in Mexico, and yet you wanted to come to the States. What happened? What were you looking for? And what did you find as you came to the States?
Well, it's interesting. My father had the desire that I become an attorney, that I will go to Princeton University. I look at Princeton. And to be honest with you, my conversion it took a turn out on my life. I don't necessarily think that I will do it again if I could repeat that, but that's what happened. I decided to go to Bible college, and my parents were like, what? So the main thing is that I wanted a Bible-believing place, and I came to Dallas to go to the Criswell College, used to call Criswell Bible College back then, which is affiliated to First Baptist Church in Dallas, as you may know. And my parents reluctantly let me come. They thought that I will get bored and decide something else. And that's not what happened. I met the father of my kids, which was quite older than me. I married him, and I continued in college when I was already married. So I married young and then continued, and I graduated from Criswell Bible College.
Well, let's talk about that. It's one thing to have a conversion experience where you leave the Catholic Church and become evangelical Christian. It's quite another to decide that that's going to be your life's calling, and that you're going to go to one of the most preeminent Bible colleges really in the country at the time, if not now, to study evangelical Christianity. That's a tremendous jump. So it was more than just personal for you. It was life changing. Tell me about that.
Well, I wanted to serve. I wanted to serve the Lord, and I wanted to tell them the good news. Back in the day, I wanted to go to Morocco. I remember very well, I wanted to learn Arabic. And I knew also that in Ceuta, in Morocco, and in North Africa, there was a population of Muslims who spoke Spanish, since the closeness with Spain is only divided by the Gibraltar Stretch. And I want to do that. But then I met the man who became my first husband, and he wanted to serve in Latin America. And so it took a while for me to understand, well, maybe I need to go back to Latin America and share this. So I thought that I will serve as a missionary for many years. So I went to Bible college. I have a degree in Bible with a specialization in missiology, in missions and cross-cultural ministry. And that's what I study, and became missionaries with a mission organization, and became full-time in ministry. I did it for quite a number of years. My kids were born during that time, and both of my sons grew up partly in Costa Rica, Mexico, and the United States. Every year we came 4 months to the United States during the summer to Dallas, Texas. They saw both worlds. And certainly, as you say, since my background is different, because I came to the States coming from living a first world life, really, because even though I came from a third world country, I was living a first world life. We saw the need in Mexico to share the good news of Jesus' salvation with that type of class that I came from. So I'm not going to say that I went to Mexico to work among the poor, because it was not necessarily what we did, but we shared the good news with the people who have it all physically, materialistically, but they did not have the salvation in Jesus Christ. And that's what we did in Pueblo and Guadalajara. And we were for 10 years there. So my kids grew up in both countries and speak both languages fluently. And certainly they speak more than 2 languages now.
I guess we'll get to that in a moment about your children. But this became a lifestyle for you. You come to the States, you find love, and you get married, and you end up working as a missionary for several years, for 10 years, over a decade.
Yes.
During that time in the United States, how were you perceived by the non-Latino population? I know that, many missionaries or many people from other parts of the country that come into the church are warmly embraced by the church and warmly embraced by the communities that they ultimately end up serving in. But I also know that coming to the States when you are from Mexico can often lead to some division and some unique experiences. Tell me about that.
Well, I felt welcome in the church, but many people who were interested in ministry. And back then, I was not paying a lot of attention until probably when I saw some reluctancy, the side of the family of the father of my kids who were reluctantly, they were not happy that he had chosen Latina, a Hispanic, a Mexican with an accent and darker skin to marry. Then probably was the first time that I really realized that there were some people who look at me differently. When I guess other people were more interested in seeing that I was very communicative in spite of my accent and very lively because I like to share and talk and help people. But there were some places that probably, yes, I saw some, if I want to say the truth, the word is prejudice, but I probably saw for the first time more of that once I became involved in politics.
That's something I want to talk about too. So politically, you're conservative. You identify as a conservative Republican. Was that driven largely by your religious training and your focus on religion, or was that something that came from outside of that, from either your father or other experiences that you had?
Well, both of them traditionally very conservative fiscally and also on social issues. But I guess on me, it was more impacted that I certainly I think it's better to help someone by teaching them how to fish than give them the fish for free. So certainly I believe in personal responsibility. I believe that we have to have limited government. But the pro-life issue was one thing that carried me a lot. And the fact that I like to protect the life of the unborn with compassion and understanding. But that was the main thing that drove me to really be involved in politics, because especially, as you know, I have been involved for almost 20 years in speaking to the Spanish-speaking media in the United States. So mainly to giving the message in Spanish through TV and radio and other media outlets and events when there is so many Spanish-speaking Hispanics in the United States, that there are people who, like me, they speak probably many of them, both languages, but they feel more comfortable speaking in Spanish. So I decided they needed somebody to communicate the issues to them, especially when they have the right to vote, so they can know before they go to vote who they are voting for.
Yeah, I think that's important to point out that you've become one of the more well-known speakers who are Spanish-speaking on Hispanic television, Spanish-speaking networks, news networks. You've become one of the more well-known speakers, particularly to defend the point of view of conservative Republicans. How has that experience either not hardened, but supported and bolstered your conservatism? Or have you found that the more you have conversations with people that may or may not be in the same belief system as you, has it shaped your opinions on issues? Have you always been as strongly conservative as you were in the beginning, or have things changed over time?
When we came back from the mission field, my family and I, watching 2006, and I decided to get involved in the first campaign when actually I was involved a little teeny bit in the Jack Kemp campaign for president back when I was in college, because I met Jack Kemp when he was running against President Bush, you remember, in the primary, and I got involved in that race, but I was not an American yet. I became an American until 1994. So I helped in that campaign as a resident of the United States, then with President Bush, but that was all. I went to the mission field, as you know. But when I came back, and for me it was important that people understood issues on life, I went to College Station for 1 year. My ex-husband was doing his doctoral dissertation. And in College Station, back then for Congressional Seat 17, Van Taylor, current Congressman Van Taylor, was running back then in his first race for Congress was for Seat 17 that now is occupied by Pete Sessions. Well, that seat, I got involved, and then they found out I spoke Spanish so fluently. They put me in the Spanish news, and that's when Jorge Ramos, the most famous political analyst and news anchor in the whole country in Spanish, he's like the Anderson Cooper of in the Spanish media, you know, Jorge. And Jorge Ramos looked at me and he said, "Who is this woman? I want to know her." So I immediately got a phone call from Univision, and they said Jorge Ramos was interested in having me in his new show, Al Punto, and they were looking for somebody who was fluently in Spanish, who could communicate public policy as good as I did. So I was one of his first guests, and I have been the Mexican political analyst who has been more times than any other person in his show that has lasted since 2006 and is the number one political show in Spanish media in the United States. That helped so I could communicate all that was public policy in every issue, healthcare or whatever. And certainly, Jason, I don't know it all, but one of the things that have helped me is that God put in my way people like you, people like many other people who maybe they know a little bit more about other issues. Immigration, I have consulting with Ivan Andarza, an immigration attorney. I spoke about many issues with Kelly Shackelford, who is very well known here in Texas and in the country. And I always got coaching, including from former Speaker Newt Gingrich. You know, in the moment that Obamacare passed his action on DACA, I happened to be in a green room with Newt Gingrich, and CNN wanted to interview him, but CNN Spanish wanted to interview me. So I sit down with Newt Gingrich and I say, "Newt, what are we going to say here?" And he said to me, "Adryana, you're going to do this, boom, boom, boom." And he started giving me the talking points immediately so I could comprehend and I could have them in my mind in Spanish, because that is the thing. We don't know all the answers all the time, but we need to process them and be able to communicate them to the people about what's going on. And that's what happened. And I'm mainly conservative. I am not a hard right conservative. I will say now that I have moved more to the center. I will say I'm a center-right Republican. That's what I am, a true original Republican from the Republican Party that you and I belong to, Jason. That's what I am. But I have moved to understand things. Yeah, I changed, for example, on my position on the cannabis, the medical cannabis. You know, the last session that we have a bill that passed. Before, I don't used to support that. I have to meet with moms of children with autism and other needs, and with some veterans that came back from war who need that medical cannabis. So I have to sit down with them to process and to say, "Hey, I actually support this." And I supported them.
Here's a tough question. Did you support Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020?
Oh man, you're asking. Let me put it this way. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton and I didn't vote for Joe Biden in the elections. I will say that way. But I will say in the primary in 2016, I started with our former governor, Rick Perry, supporting him. And we have so many great choices, as you remember, Jason, so many of them, former governors with a lot of experience. So it was difficult because I like all of them, many of them. And I used to work even before with Mike Huckabee. I supported in his first race for president. Mike Huckabee was my guy. And he was also running. But I say, who can beat Hillary Clinton? And I honestly thought, Rick Perry could. Then he stepped aside and I was, it is Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. And I was about to support Jeb Bush when he stepped out. And I voted for Marco Rubio in the primary on 2016. And then I became a delegate in the convention. I have been a delegate 3 times, a national delegate. I was a delegate for Ted Cruz. But it was very difficult for me. And I tried during the last 4 years to support good policies that the Trump administration did on regards of the economy and jobs. But I will say, and I say it again, I was never a Trump fan at all. And in this one, it was a very difficult situation for me because right during the elections and everything, I was told 4 months ago that I have a terminal illness, and my family and the people who love me and even myself, we have to talk. And I decide to close my mouth on regards to politics and concentrate on my health. And that was a difficult thing, to be honest with you. And certainly after election night, seeing all the things that developed, I was pretty much not happy with the response of our former president. And it's so sad, all the things that occurred during the last weeks prior to the transferring of power.
One of the things that you've mentioned in our discussion about politics is that initially your conservatism was driven largely by the pro-life movement and the protection of life, which I think is a common theme through many Hispanics who identify as conservative Republicans. But I think some of your thinking on other issues may have evolved. And we talked briefly about one of those. I'd like to talk about immigration. I'd like to talk about LGBT. I'd like to talk about your commitment to, during the Tea Party movement, were you a part of that? Were you a part of that far right? And I know that you're not any longer, but what were the changes that occurred to you that said, this movement on the far right? And as you know, I was never a part of that. What changed about you that you decided that's just not really for me?
Well, what it changed was to see many vocal voices of the Tea Party movement speaking with xenophobia and prejudice. And that was the first time I saw heavy prejudice from my party. And I spoke in the largest ever Tea Party in the country, the one in South Fork, 35,000 people. And I remember I invited Univision to come and record my message because I spoke 5 minutes in Spanish that they gave me on the air to speak. And I saw how many Tea Party members started screaming to the cameraman and to the reporter, kicking them out and telling them, get out of here. We don't need Univision here. We don't need the Spanish speaking. We speak English in America. And it was just so awful. Awful. And they were being recorded, I remember I had to call a couple of the Tea Party organizers to say, what's going on with this? And then certainly the Tea Party came with good sense on regards of being good on fiscal policy, low taxations, less taxes is important for all of us. But then the thing became very anti-immigrant, and that included every single immigrant. It doesn't matter if you were legal immigrant or who came illegally, but were working very respectfully and decently, it was just everybody in the same bag and in a very awful way. So yes, that disturbed me pretty much. And certainly,
did you experience any of that personally? I know.
Oh, I did.
Yeah,
I ran for office. You remember that? And when I ran for office, I experienced it.
What kind of experiences happened? What happened?
Well, knocking at the people's door, trying to express to people's Republicans that I wanted to represent as a state representative in North Dallas for District 102. And people just by looking at me, listening at my accent, they didn't want to listen to anything else and slam the door on me. We don't want a Mexican representing me. Yeah, things like that.
That's hurtful. I know that.
Very hurtful.
I experienced some of that during the time that I was running, not to that stark degree, but, I think it's important that we share those stories. Yes. And like you, I believe that the party that we originally signed up for back in the 80s, the Ronald Reagan, the H.W. Bush, the George Bush, really embraced the big tent model, and it was focused on smaller government and lower taxes and self-responsibility. But then it morphed during those years to become something much more nativist and focused on this sort of anti-immigrant bias that I think Trump tapped into. And so I think that's the conventional wisdom, I think, from people outside looking into our community said, how could anybody support Trump when he really tapped into that anti-immigrant style of leadership? And, it's a tough question, I think, and it's hard to answer. And I think you answered it earlier by saying, look, you just tried to focus on the good things that he represented and the policies that the party was championing that were good for people, small business.
Well, Jason, for the record, I just want to mention something. I used to belong to the largest Republican women's club in the country, the largest in Texas. I'm not going to say the name, which one it is. And the president back then went to a couple of people helping me in my race and told them, do not support Adryana. And these girls asked, why not? And the answer was, because she's Mexican. This woman, in fact, the one who was president, was caught on camera in Dallas stealing a sign from a candidate that she did not support from a door that she went to knock, removed that sign from the front door, and was caught on camera. That same woman is the one who was trying to take people away from my race because I was Mexican. And she started supporting another candidate who was a good man and had a very important and interesting story, but he didn't have any record of ever being involved in politics in Texas. And she just wanted to support him because she didn't want me to be representative. So it was very difficult for me.
Someone who experienced what you experienced during your time in running for public office and some of the experiences that you had with certain individuals who identify as conservative Republicans, how is it that after that you can remain committed to the party?
Well, it's interesting because I'm not sure what I want to do now. I took the last 4 months for myself to concentrate on my health and fighting for my life, because that's what I am doing right now. But I do believe, and people want me back, and I have been asked to be back at a national level during election night and during the transferring of power night as well. And if I do that, I wanted to say, and I'm going to put it this way. During the speech on the 6th of January, there was a speech to call to stop the steal by an organization for women. And the former president's son, Donald Trump Jr., gave a speech where he said, "This is not the Republican Party anymore. This is the Trump's Republican Party." I do want to say, well, that's not my party. I'm not part of that. I am a Republican, and that's what I want to continue to be. But if our Republican Party has been taken over, and use whatever verb, kidnap, taken by, because it's full of members that you and I, Jason, know that they were not members of our party 4 or 5 years ago. They were not. They suddenly came in. They penetrated our party. I use the word, they rape our party in a way. That's not my party. That's not the party that I was part of. So I don't know what is going to happen and which decision I will make within the next days. But I don't identify with the violence and with the rhetoric, the harsh rhetoric that we have heard, and with the division that we have seen. And I don't identify with the left either. So it's difficult. It's difficult for me. And the one thing I am committed to, and is that if I am able to survive to what I'm going through right now, which is stage 3 pancreatic cancer, all I can say is that I will fight to the nail for the middle-class, hardworking, tax-paying, self-employed American who needs a good way to have healthcare in America, because that's one thing that I'm going through, and I believe that healthcare is important. I just don't know what else I am committed to do right now in regards to our party.
I think a lot of people feel like you do. I certainly do. I'm a classic Republican like you. I'm center right like you.
Yes.
I don't identify fully with some of the premises of the left, but I will not be a part of the Trumplicans, right? I'm a Reagan, Bush, Romney Republican, and anything other than that, particularly anything to do with Trump, I'm out. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And you and I come from similar backgrounds in the sense that politically we were both classic Republicans. You may have been more conservative than I was on certain issues. That lends some real color to the ongoing debate that we're seeing in the party, because I do think there is a split coming in the party where there's going to be the Trump party as Donald Trump Jr. identified, and then the classic Reagan conservative Republican Party. And then we'll see, how that plays out.
And the problem is the people who are leaving, Jason, because there are people who have left the party because of this situation, and we're losing young people because of this.
That's true. There's no question that we are losing so many young people and millennials and others who just don't share our classic philosophies on certain things. One of those is, the social issues. And now, I think most Republicans have to identify as pro-life. There's no question about that. I certainly do. But there are issues that have divided the party in the past, particularly around LGBT and other issues. And, during my
Yes.
time in the legislature, I was committed to being open-minded about it. And I even voted to support LGBT causes, much to the chagrin of many of the people that put me in office. And so
Mhm.
I took a lot of heat for that. What are your thoughts on some of these more social issues?
Well, on LGBTQ, I did evolve myself. And I think the main issue is that many of these members of LGBTQ society are tax paying people who want also to hardworking people and people with great values. And in my personal case, it took me a while because I used to be against all type of LGBTQ efforts to be part of society and to be recognized as part of our society as equal members. And I happen to be a sister and a mother of gay men that are incredible, brilliant minds, incredible people who have never even had a ticket in their life. I mean, who have always fulfilled the laws of our country. And I listen not only to them, but many, many conservative and many people who are members of LGBTQ and others who are relatives of. And I do not like the rhetoric and the harsh things that I hear against these members. And, many of them have been working in the Republican Party, and some of them have left because of that. So I did evolve in, that was one of the issues that I think that the Republican Party needs to stop fighting and to start listening. They need to be better listeners.
Well, I think I always look to the great Dick Cheney on these kinds of issues. As you know, he was very open of his support of his daughter, who
Yes.
did come out during a time when it wasn't popular, among certain groups. And Dick Cheney was embracing of her, of course, because he's a parent. And, like all parents, we just love our kids and we love our relatives and we love our parents. And
Yes.
if they happen to have a different way of being with others, then, who am I to be the judge on that? And so I think,
Yes.
like you, a lot of people who are conservatives have a more of an open mind on that. But, you look to the different generations and, my parents are still going to be strongly against those kinds of relationships. And largely it's cultural and part of their generation. But I think that
Yes.
the next generation of the Republican Party has to be embracive of that. I want to talk
Yes.
finally about you and where you are today. So you did mention that you're fighting a battle for your life. You're going through a very serious situation. How are you doing? How are your kids doing? How has your husband been with this? And where do you feel like you are in the battle?
Well, it was surprising. It was by the middle of September that everything was normal. Well, normal what it can be during a pandemic, right? But then suddenly I find out that I have a tumor. And then from there, we find out that is pancreatic cancer, already stage 3, and that I have 6 months to 1 year to live. And certainly we decided that we will fight. We realized we could not fight in my country, America. And because we are in the middle, we do not, as I mentioned to you, hardworking, tax-paying, self-employed Americans who we just could not afford the type of insurance that it was available, but we do not qualify for Medicaid either because we're in that middle class. So I had to look at my birth country and went back to Mexico to where it is more affordable to receive the chemotherapy that I need. I've been 4 months receiving FOLFIRINOX, which is the most aggressive type of chemotherapy. I have a tumor in my pancreas in the central part and in the tail, attached to the main veins that provide blood to my body. And because it's attached, I don't qualify for the surgery that is needed to save my life. So after 8 rounds and other alternatives that I've been doing, it's a possibility that is starting to shrink and reduce. And we're going to continue trying with radiotherapy and other things to fight so I can be a candidate for the surgery that is needed. The odds of living, and I know that you lost your sister, your beloved sister, as well of cancer. The odds of living for pancreatic cancer is 8.5% of people survive pancreatic cancer. And certainly those who survive only survive for 5 years and because they have the surgery. So certainly these have been an impact for my husband, who is a healthcare attorney for my 2 sons. One of them lives in Dallas and another one lives in Japan. He flew during Christmas time to be with me with all the restrictions that they have in Japan to come and go back to his job. And the most important thing, and my Bible verse is for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. I'm ready to fight it. And we have been fighting. And I'm grateful for everybody who has been praying and supporting me on this effort. But at the same time, I am very committed that if I can survive, I want to fight for the cure of these and other cancers, as well as for good healthcare for those of us who are caught in the middle. And it's interesting because I know a lovely lady who cleans homes and is undocumented in this country. She has breast cancer and she is being taken care of by the government. And she say, Adryana, why they are helping me and they don't help you? And I say, I'm glad that they are helping you. But to be honest with you, you are right. We are paying the taxes and you are receiving the benefit. I don't receive one single entitlement of benefit from America right now. And I have to continue fighting. So that's where I am, Jason.
Isn't that, part of the story that we have to talk about, right? I mean,
Yes.
So many people don't understand, one, how healthcare works, how health insurance works, how Medicaid and Medicare work, how it works among the different countries. And, there are some valid concerns from American citizens who are struggling to pay these kinds of bills. And yet there are an undocumented population that do receive some benefits. And I can see why, that is troubling to many people who identify as conservatives and Republicans. And it's important to have a frank and open conversation. And I think, your story is one that really puts a light on that, because I think so many people perceive that, that's not the case, or there's no instances of that, or it's anecdotal, and it may or may not be. But the bottom line is there is some unfairness in our system, and we have to address it in some way that works, and be it through some form of changes to our existing healthcare policies or not. I mean, something has to change. Texas is the largest uninsured state in the country for healthcare, health insurance. And, that's not something that we should be proud of as a state. Now, I know it was something that many of my Democrat brothers and sisters wanted to change when they were when I was in office. And I know that it's on the agenda now. So we will pray for you in our home. I know that people listening to this will pray for your recovery. Thank you for being a part of our story today. I want to leave it on that note, because I want people to really think about your closing remarks and what it means, and how powerful that statement is, given your background and where you come from, and your story and your success and your political acumen, and, all the things you experience are so important. And I just want to say, God bless. I look forward to seeing you soon, healthy and happy, and we'll break bread when we both get vaccinated, and hopefully have a drink.
Yes.
We'll see you speak on Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation's Our Story. Well, I'm Jason Villalba, your host, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Gracias.
The Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation would like to thank you for joining us today on Our Story. You can find more information about the foundation at www.txhpf.org, on Facebook on the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation page, or on Twitter @TexHPF. Please join us next week on Our Story, a podcast dedicated to the voices of Texas Hispanics.